Now to business, and later this Thursday we'll be getting new figures on unemployment in the States, which will show the impact the pandemic is having on the world's biggest economy. Now, last week's numbers saw a jump of more than 3 million people out of work. For more, let's cross now to our business editor, Stephen Carroll. Stephen, this will be a major event to watch for the markets, won't it?
We're expecting another massive increase in those jobless figures in the United States. So it was the week before last that more than 3 million people registered as unemployed in the US, and that was 4 times the previous record for a single week's increase. The figures we're going to get today are for last week, so many more shops and factories will have been closed in the United States, and as a result, economists are expecting between 2 to 3 million more people to be added to the register of unemployed in the United States. And that's a huge chunk of people who are going to be out of work in the world's biggest economy, with the knock-on effects that that has for the rest of the world. Meanwhile, other countries are also seeing big changes to their labour markets. In Spain, for example, the latest figure is showing a record increase in the number of people out of work, up 9%. 900,000 people have lost their jobs in Spain since the confinement there began. And most of those were temporary workers, but still around 300,000 of those were in more permanent employment. They're now out of work. And in France, the Labour Minister is saying today that now 1 in 5 French workers in the private sector are availing of the government's short-time work or temporary layoff unemployment insurance. That's where the government will pay up to 80% of an employee's salary to keep them in work, so that their companies won't lay them off in the meantime. So a huge impact across economies around the world, but those US figures could provide a big shock for the markets later on.
Now, meanwhile, airlines across the globe are having to take very tough decisions as international travel grinds to a halt.
And we're hearing today that British Airways is in talks with unions to suspend more than 30,000 of its workers. This, according to the Reuters news agency, among others, that an agreement is going to be put in place for those workers to be put on the UK's short-term employment scheme again, which will see the government pay 80% of their salaries to keep them on the books of the airline. It's thought to represent around 80% of ground staff and cabin crew at British Airways. Of course, as most of the airline's planes are grounded, as is the case for most carriers around the world, those people are technically out of work anyway, but this will be a massive shift for that company. But it's a challenge that's facing airlines around the world, many of them having totally grounded their fleets as international travel has ground to a halt in most parts of the world. In fact, industry experts are saying that, when we come out of this, when international travel resumes, there will have been airlines that will have collapsed and been pushed into bankruptcy by this crisis. And that will mean for travellers, there'll be a lot fewer options and more expensive tickets for those who return to international travel when this crisis ends. This has been recognised in many of the rescue packages we've seen. The US, for example, pumping $50 billion into passenger airlines, but it's a sector that's seeing huge trouble and has massive challenges ahead.
Stephen Carroll, thank you.